live stream. Just a second. Okay, we should be live now. So welcome everyone to our second strategic planning meeting for 2024. And we have lots to discuss. I'm going to dive right into it because some folks have limited time today and I want to make the most of it while they're here. Let me share my notes that we looked at last time. So in our first session, we talked about a number of, we kind of did a high level review of the topics that we want to explore in these sessions. I was actually just making some changes here. Bear with me one second. I was just going to split these to matching and case management. So we explored a few different topics that we need to sort of think about our plans for. One is what we could put under the heading of our primary e-NABLE website. We need a better way of, the landing page where we initially direct people so they can learn about e-NABLE, learn about who we are, what we do, how they can get involved, what sort of services we provide, just presenting information in a more easily digestible manner, and then directing people off to whatever it is that they need, whether they're looking to get help or looking to offer help, looking to support us in different ways. We want a friendlier way to invite them into the community and get them to where they need to go. So Morgan is plugged in on that. We'll talk more about some of the ideas that we've tossed around, but we know that we need a better primary website that will ultimately live at enable.org and will then direct people off to the different platforms that we have and the different resources that we have as needed. We also talked about the need for how we manage matching and case management. And I think I'd like to make this the focus of today if possible, because this is probably the main thing that we need to figure out in order to understand next steps for what is a rather large effort. And we've had some meetings outside of this since our last strategic planning meeting that I'll bring you up to speed on. And then we also talked about our design catalogs, of which we currently have 3 going. Basically, we've got our catalog on the hub. We've got a catalog in the works on the NIH 3D Print Exchange, and we've got a catalog on printables that Eric Buvar has been developing. And I think there's still work to be done here, but I think the general idea is that printables might make sense to be kind of the primary focus for our recommended designs. Like these are the ones that you really want to be focusing on if you just want to know what we recommend. Whereas NIH might be more of a fuller catalog that might include the very fully mature designs as well as designs that are still maybe more experimental. It's going to have a lot more filters so that you can kind of dig through that catalog and find different devices for different needs and different devices that might still be in development, et cetera. And then the catalog on the hub might just go away. We might just direct people to those 2 catalogs as needed. At least that's where I think that the directions seem to be going, but that's still up for discussion. And then we talked about outreach efforts and grants and fundraising, which I think are going to be discussions for a later time, because especially on the side of outreach, we really need to have this new web platform in place first, because once we start doing outreach and marketing campaigns, we need to have a really good place to send people where they can, easily understand who we are and how they can get involved and how we can help them. So those are kind of the high level topics that we talked about. And if it's okay with you guys, like I said, I'd like to kind of focus in on the matching and case management, because since our last meeting, there were a couple of other meetings that took place. Number one, I had a meeting with Jonathan, who's here today, as well as another volunteer, Dirk. Both of them are helping us now with case facilitation on e-NABLE Web Central. And what that means is, e-NABLE Web Central has always been a self-service platform, but cases have a tendency to kind of get stuck because of the way the system is designed. It has some complexity that we'd like to eliminate if we were to continue to work with e-NABLE Web Central, which is something we'll talk about here. But the way it's designed right now, cases sometimes have a tendency to get stuck. They don't move forward. And that's where we need a case facilitator to come in and reach out to the people involved in the case and kind of help them to get it moving to the next steps. And so we finally have 2 volunteers that are helping us with that once again. And I had a meeting with Jonathan and Dirk to kind of introduce them to the platform and the tools that we have to help them with case facilitation. And as we were going through that, they got to see a lot of what's in e-NABLE Web Central. And we then talked a little bit about the new platform that we are working on building, the one that is being used by the e-NABLE France, which uses a WordPress-based site, uses a Google map with pins on it to identify who's looking for devices and where the volunteers offering to make devices. And somebody can go in and use that map as a mechanism for making the matches. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between these two platforms, because one of the things that we realized is towards the end of our discussion, Jonathan and Dirk kind of commented that in moving to this new platform that we're working on, there are a lot of things that we're going to be giving up that in terms of the functionality that e-NABLE Web Central has. And so at that point, I realized that, well, really the reason we've been moving in the direction of retiring e-NABLE Web Central is because in order to move forward with it, we need developers that can, be there to help if issues arise, but also make improvements to it, which I'll talk a little bit about in a short bit here. But we kind of ruled that out just because of cost and complexity. But now we have this funding that has come in from Aero Electronics. We have this $100,000 that's at our disposal. And it occurred to me that it's worth having another discussion before we kind of make a final decision on our direction. I think it's worth looking at the possibility of using what we have already built in e-NABLE Web Central, making some changes to that platform to address its shortcomings, and moving forward with that versus, developing this platform that we have on the WordPress side. And I wanted to just spend a little time talking about the pros and cons of both of those approaches. Had I had more time ahead of today, I would have prepared some slides laying out the pros and cons. I just didn't have time. So I'm going to try to summarize this verbally, if you don't mind, and then open it up for some discussion to see what you guys think. At the end of the day, it's trying to figure out what's going to best serve the community. And I don't think
Also effort going in.
I'm sorry, what was
We
that,
need to
Morgan?
try to, I said also effort going in. We need to try to minimize the,
And the
amount
effort
of
going
time
in.
it takes to develop. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So looking at pros and cons, I'm just going to show a couple things as we talk on. So some of you might not be familiar with e-NABLE Web Central. And I'm not going to give you a complete tour, but it is designed as a matching and case management platform. So it does share some things in common. It has a map, just like the new platform that we're working on under WordPress. The difference is that this map really is focused on showing the cases, that is, the people requesting devices. The volunteers that are offering to help don't appear on the map. That is something that we could think about doing, but right now it's used just as a way of exploring the cases. The difference is that with the WordPress platform, it's essentially a matching mechanism. So you can go into the map on the WordPress platform and you can, a facilitator can select one of the requests. They get a drop down showing the volunteers sorted by distance. They can make a match. And then from there, things are handled basically by email, where people just work the case. So in other words, the WordPress platform provides a tool for matching, but it doesn't really go beyond matching. It doesn't really do case management. And so we'd have to talk about, well, how do we do case management? How do we track cases? How do we have centralized sort of reporting or visibility into, the status of all of our ongoing cases and get, statistics and that sort of stuff in a structured way. e-NABLE Web Central has that because it's based on a database. So it has, in addition to the ability to do matching, it has all of the case data in there. And so this is where Jonathan and Dirk and I started talking about sort of, let's just think about what we're giving up if we move away from this. So if we look at, for example, I'm going to pop into one of the existing cases here. When you look at a case on e-NABLE Web Central, under case information, you have a detailed description that was provided by the person asking for the device. You can kind of understand the background, what their situation is, what they're looking for. You can see the photos that they've shared so that you can get a sense of, the anatomy and what you're dealing with. You can see all of the sort of the key details, the name, the relationship, age, any types of devices that they're interested in, any preferences they might have shared about what they're looking for, things like that. And then you can see volunteers that have been assigned to the case, and you can see details about those volunteers, including maybe what badges they've earned, so you can get a sense of kind of what that person has experience with. You can see any kind of messaging that's been associated with the case. In this case, there isn't any, but you could see there's a history of messages that have been exchanged. You can see the devices that have been created for this case. In this case, it hasn't gotten that far, so there aren't, but those devices would show up here. There would be photos and details about the device that's being created. And you actually have an activity log, so you can see sort of who created the case when, who offered at different times. You can see exactly what happened each step of the way. There's basically an audit trail for every activity that's happened on the case. And so, I just wanted to give you a sense of the fact that there's a lot of good information in here. This is all in a database, so it's all stuff that can be queried and reported on, and we can sort of summarize how many cases are going and the average length of time it's taking to do cases and which device designs are most popular, and also all kinds of things can come out of this data. The downsides, the kind of the cons, if you will, of e-NABLE Web Central, I think come down to complexity. It's the user experience leaves a lot to be desired. The way we designed it as a self-service portal requires a lot of back and forth where the person that requests a device puts in the initial device request and uploads their photos and their details, and then volunteers get to offer to help. But then the person that created the case has to approve one of those volunteers. Then that volunteer can recommend a certain device type and scale. Then the device creator has to approve that suggestion. Then the volunteer can make the device. And so there's this back and forth approval, and that is where cases have gotten stuck. And so one of the things that I want to put on the table for consideration is, we could look at moving forward with e-NABLE Web Central by making changes to eliminate that back and forth. So we would maintain a lot of what it has to offer. That is, all the case data that's in here, the ability to maintain all these data points and the photos and the status of the cases and what's happening on the case, but eliminate the back and forth. Basically make it so that a person requests a device, a volunteer can offer to help, they get connected, and they just do the case. The volunteer just updates the case as it proceeds without this back and forth approval being needed in order to move it forward. And I don't, that wouldn't take too much to do that. It's basically just eliminating pieces of the code. So that's a possibility worth exploring, because we do have the option now of hiring some contract developers, bringing them in, getting them familiar with the code. Now that's another con. It is a complex code base. There are thousands and thousands of lines of code in e-NABLE Web Central. It's got a very complex database design with a lot of interrelated tables. So somebody would have to take some time to get up to speed. It's built on a platform of Microsoft C#.NET with a SQL database backend, which might or might not be a great platform to be building apps on today. I'm not a developer, so I don't know. When you look at how many people are there out there with that particular skill set, I don't know if there are as many nowadays, or maybe nowadays it's more PHP or, other platforms that I don't even know the terminology for. So that's a consideration. Tied in with that is, because it's built on C#.NET, it's kind of a Microsoft-oriented approach. That is, it needs to be hosted on a Microsoft Windows server running IIS with the appropriate licensing behind that. And so that affects your hosting costs. It needs to be on, it's not maybe as cost effective as hosting something that could be on a Linux server or a Unix server that's running open source.
Sorry, can you say again what it was hosted on?
It's hosted on Azure right now.
Okay.
So it's hosted on Azure using a virtual machine running a Windows server with IIS with a SQL database. So we'd have to look at that cost. If we keep it on Azure, it's going to cost us several $100s a month to keep it hosted there. I'm sure there are more affordable ways of hosting, even with the current infrastructure. Even if we're staying with a Windows, virtual machine, there are other hosting services that would be a lot less expensive than Azure. So we could explore just migrating to a different hosting provider, but keeping the infrastructure, otherwise built on the same platform as it is. But those are some of the things that we'd have to consider if we wanted to try to move forward with e-NABLE Web Central. The alternative, of course, is this WordPress platform, which would not take nearly as much effort to get up and running. It just basically, they already gave us the code. We have it running in a sandbox. It's mostly a matter of doing some translation work to get it, oriented more towards an English audience, which would be primary, but it is multilingual ready. So It already has, you know, a lot of content in French. We make sure it's ready to go in English, and then we could start adding other languages, which is a huge plus for our global community. I really like that multilingual capability. It's got a plugin that lets us just keep adding languages, you know, and all we have to do is have somebody do the translations once we have the content the way we want. To get that platform up and running wouldn't take a whole lot of effort. But again, it goes as far as matching, and then it kind of stops there. So if we go that route, we have to then think about, okay, what are we doing for case management? How do we actually track and monitor cases? How do we have centralized visibility into cases? Do we just leave it to chapters to kind of handle their cases? And, you know, we kind of give up on trying to have centralized data on what's happening throughout the entire community. These are things that we have to think about. So there's a lot more to this, but I don't want to spend any more time talking here. I want to hear from some of you guys. So thoughts, and maybe I could start with Eric, because I know he's going to have to leave any minute now. Do you have any thoughts on this, Eric? Because I know you've used this platform. Any opinions you'd like to share?
Yeah, so it lets you do a lot, and I think it lets you do too much probably. Um, I do. I like the idea of making it more simplified. So maybe WordPress works well because there's lots of people that can do WordPress and know how to do that. So you have a huge set of people that can help maintain that.
That's true.
And then lots of people you could pay to do that too. But then that follow-up part, I think, is something to really, really think about and get a really good system for the follow-up and case management. Because that's a place where we don't do a great job.
Right.
I think some individual groups do, but they all have their own little system. So maybe that's the way to do
Right.
it. Each group has their own. And we don't
That
try
is
to
one
handle
option. I mean, one of the things that we talked a little bit about is, okay, if we have this platform, the WordPress-based platform, we have a map with pins. We have somebody that goes in on a periodic basis and does the matching. They select somebody on the map that's looking for a device. They match them with a volunteer. They get connected by email. We could set up something as simple as a Google Sheet or an Airtable or whatever tool we choose, where the person doing that matching, who's going to be a volunteer, part of their responsibility would be, once they make that match, they have to go in and enter it on this spreadsheet or in this, you know, whatever tool we're using. They just add a line saying, you know, here's a new case, here's the name and email of the person requesting the device, here's the name and the email of the volunteer that was assigned. And then there's a few columns, you know, status, you know, in progress. You know, I don't know. We'd have to think about what data points we want to try to keep track of in there. And then, you know, that volunteer or maybe another volunteer would have a responsibility of periodically following up just by email with each of those cases to say, hey, where's your case at? You know, what's the status? And then they would update the spreadsheet based on the replies they get. I mean, that's one possibility here. John, I see you got your hand up.
You know, I find, and I think I'm concerned that the Microsoft platform has been a real burden.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, and that all of the features and the tracking that you've talked about are interesting and reflect a great deal of useful thinking about the process and what we might want to track. But that resides in the SQL database. I'm thinking maybe we should see whether a non-Microsoft platform can be built around this SQL database so that the data that we have is retained, but we're, instead of trying to pare away C++, C# code that a much smaller group can do, we build out the front end.
Or even getting away from SQL. I mean, you know, because SQL is another Microsoft thing, another licensing issue. And,
but there are open source SQLs.
That's my point. I mean, there's got to be an open source database that's ready to use with WordPress. I haven't looked into this, but I'm sure someone here knows about this.
It's
I'm sure I can find the answer very quick.
Okay. Oh, that's true, because WordPress itself is already built on a MySQL database, so you could probably just add tables into that and query them. So with some PHP code, we could tap into that and add some extra data tables for tracking our cases. And maybe we just build on top of what is already here. And basically we start with just the matching function and get that launched. And then we could kind of continue to build past that and add in functionality for tracking cases and reporting on cases and do it through the WordPress MySQL that's already there.
Yeah, there's plenty of, yeah, there's databases that the MySQL database is actually quite extensive.
Okay.
Just,
Well, that's a pretty interesting
I'll
idea.
send this in the chat. This is less than a minute of Googling, so if it's not actually helpful, just ignore it.
Thierry,
But
has your team looked at this at all? Has your team explored ways of doing something with the database or anything like that?
Actually, as you mentioned, Jeremy, we are not very good in doing anything after the matching. But what I would probably look into, you know how I work, I try to make things simple that work and build on that.
Yes.
So what I would first try to implement would be a solution that would allow us to know precisely when a device has been delivered, which is something we don't have today. And then, so we have the beginning, the matching, and the end of the project, and then add intermediary steps. But it's just a matter of building the right PHP code and finding the right functions you want. It shouldn't be very complicated. And it is something that belongs to technology widely spread today. So it's very easy to find a developer that could speak that kind of language.
And MySQL is the preferred for WordPress, and then there's a sort of like a fork off of that called Maria database that could also be used, but MySQL is going to be your most extensive.
Excellent. That's sounding like a really attractive approach to me. Anyone else here have thoughts about that? Does that sound like it? Because I don't want to spend too much time, thinking about possibilities. If this feels like it's the right direction.
if that one doesn't work, we can use MongoDB, which is a well-known open source database.
Yep.
Excellent.
You can.
Okay. So then I think unless there are any objections, I think we should start to focus our efforts on, okay, let's move in this direction of getting this new platform ready to launch with the information that we want to present about e-NABLE, with the basic ability to request a device and get a pin on the map and do that basic matching function. Probably using something as simple as a spreadsheet in the beginning to track those cases, but then having the plan of adding in code to use maybe the MySQL database or maybe the Mongo database to track case data and expand on that going forward. And if that's kind of the general idea, then we can kind of get back to where we were of thinking about what is the approach for that, what does the team look like, what kind of funding support do they need? Thierry, thoughts?
Yes, just one thing. I've dropped in the chat section a link to the French map if you want to display it so people will see how it looks like when it's populated.
Yes, I actually just had that up a moment ago, but yes, yours will have pins on it, so that's helpful. So here's a map that actually is populated.
Nice. I do really like the ability to make it multilingual.
Yes,
That is a
multilingual
massive
feature.
plus.
Very nice. And so they already have it set up for French and English. And like I said, adding other languages is as easy as setting it up in the admin and then copying and pasting the content through a good translation tool and then having, a human fine tune it. But you can do a lot of that with automated translation tools these days. So I think we could very quickly build out other languages with some volunteer help. But
I also want to reinforce Thierry's point that there are two key, the notion of latching on to the delivery as an endpoint. And I want to say, I'd like it to be possible to log deliveries, even if they didn't come in through our matching process.
Mm-hmm.
Because that opens up the opportunity for collecting data for people who are not using our system
Right.
and harvesting cases from the media,
Right.
and then using the same system as a pooled repository of everything we know about every e-NABLE case anywhere we have become aware of it.
And that was something we talked about in our last meeting of, as a parallel effort or a secondary effort, having
Mhm.
somebody work on actually scraping social media and other media sources using some kind of AI perhaps to look for signs of those e-NABLE device deliveries and automatically gathering them for us, which I think is becoming more and more doable these days with the AI tools available to actually make sure we're getting good data.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I mean, it sounds to me like we have a good sort of consensus on the direction we want to take here. Does anybody want to pose an alternate point of view? Does anybody feel like this might not be the direction to go? Okay. Well, so Morgan, then I think this is going to go back into your court now,
Yep.
maybe to regroup on that other meeting to talk about, okay, how do we get the team together? What kind of funding do we want to try to put into getting you the help that you need to get this done and
Sounds good.
getting the site launched? So
Perfect. I'll make that
Yep.
meeting again with the same people as last time.
Sure.
yeah, I'm in. Anyone else?
Cool.
Anyone else here interested that maybe wasn't part of that last meeting?
Yeah.
Anyone want part of this discussion of actually building out this site and getting it launched?
No, that's great.
I'm seeing there's a thumbs up from Maddie there, Morgan. So include her, please.
Yep, yep, yep.
I just want to say, don't pull the plug on on having a functional e-NABLE Web Central
No,
somewhere, even if
we'll keep it running until
right,
this is up
because
and going.
my point is, it's a really good collection of interactions that we can use to consider requirements for the new system.
Of course. And by the way, I still have all of in fact, I was going to look at this today, but I went back and pulled up some of my, like this was the original development roadmap from e-NABLE Web Central. I detail out all of the different functionality that we were going to build out and what's been done, what hasn't been done. I've got database design documents. I mean, we've got a lot of documentation on e-NABLE Web Central, not to mention the database itself. So even if we sort of retire the system at some point in favor of this new one, we'll still have all of this documentation and process data and all of that good stuff.
Cool.
Okay, great. So I think that feels like a really good direction. And it feels like we have a path towards getting the functionality that we need in a way that will be simple and accessible and easy to get launched and then build onto later. So that's great. And I'm thrilled that we have a good team coming together already. We've got Morgan taking the lead and project managing this, and she's already got several volunteers that have offered to help, including Todd, who was in our previous meeting, and some others that can help with getting that going.
Hey,
John, had your hand?
Jeremy, just
Yeah, Jason.
oh, I apologize. Just out of curiosity, the map itself on that on Web Central that we were looking at, is that okay? It is Google Maps. Okay.
Well, yeah, they're both. Yeah, so e-NABLE Web Central and the one on WordPress, yes, they both leverage Google Maps.
Okay, got you. I know Google Maps has some APIs that go along with it as well.
That's
I'm not sure how much we're leveraging that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're both using the Google API. So there's just a Google Maps API key that you plug in, and then it's some simple code to do.
There are other entirely browser-based mapping systems available these days, where you don't need to deal with the Google Maps database. And I mean, you can, there are examples where you can just ask ChatGPT to generate the code. It's less than 50 lines of code, and you've got something, maybe not with the sidebar, that is similar to this. So we have options beyond Google Maps, although Google Maps may be the perfect least common denominator.
Yeah, I mean, it works and it's already built, so it's probably the way to go for now, but it's always good to have options.
Before we break, when you're ready to move to another topic, since we have Ian and Eric here, I'd really like to talk about our diversity of device catalogs
Sure.
and that challenge.
Sounds good. So yeah, I think we have a good sense of direction now on matching and case management. So we'll have Morgan set up another meeting to dive into the approach for that and
Yep.
possibly putting some funding towards it. And anyone who's interested can join us for that. So that means that, yeah, we can move on and talk a little bit about our design catalog.
Just keep an eye out for the Calendly link for the poll, and we can.
Got it.
Yeah.
You got it. Thank you, Morgan.
Yep.
As I mentioned before, we currently have 3 design catalogs, one on the hub, one on NIH, which Ian Roy is facilitating, and one on printables that Eric Bubar is facilitating. So who'd like to start? Ian, any updates for us?
Well, I have this proposal I shared last time that, oops, I haven't submitted yet. But I think one of the ways forward might be for the group to get this to the state where we think we could put it on Lumio. And right now it's spec for 1 student, could be for many students, and figuring out how we divide out that work.
Okay.
I think our basic strategy we outlined last time is a good strategy. I think we just have to find the people to implement it.
So I think I might have mentioned that before you joined. I'm not sure, but at the beginning of this meeting, I mentioned that I think if I'm remembering that approach correctly, we talked about maybe printables being a very selective kind of a catalog of, like, if you're just looking for our most recommended hand, arm, finger, of each type of device, that would be the catalog of, like, the most mature, the most well-vetted designs ready for the public. And then the NIH catalog would be the full catalog of everything, the fully mature designs, the work in progress designs, the other kinds of assistive tech, everything with lots of filtering capabilities to let you explore that catalog and find everything that we have to offer. Am I remembering that correctly? Does that seem like a sensible way of looking at this? Okay. John?
I need to be reminded why you would want NIH to have the hundreds of designs that are out there and just confuse people who go to a well-curated government website.
Well, maybe not. That's worth discussing. My thinking was, I think we want to have the full catalog somewhere, right? I mean, we want to have somewhere for people, even if it's a work in progress or just an idea that they're trying to get help with. We need somewhere for them to be able to share it. And I'm trying to move away from having 3 different places where we have designs. So to that end, my thinking was, well, as long as we design the sidebar on NIH the way we want, where we have all those different filters, where we can search by maturity level, by the quality of the documentation available, by the type of design, by the type of limb difference that it suits, we'll have to think about what all those filters are. But as long as we have a really good set of filters, it shouldn't matter if there's hundreds of designs in there, because you're going to select the filters for what you're looking for, and you'll get a nice, clean, filtered view of just the ones that fit those queries. That was kind of how I was thinking about it, but
I agree. And I think there's a template. If you look, I put the link up for the COVID-19 response. I think the NIH's 3D Exchange did a great job vetting PPE for production similarly. And on the side there, there's the collection up at the top, and there's approved use. So this really filters down. They used to have this tiered out during the pandemic. Now they've sort of put it on a side filter. One of the benefits here is they do have a developer team who's in active development, and we can give metadata schema to, and they will help us realize it. I like that there's like another team that has an incentive to build out this schema and implement it. And it should last for a really long time. They've got a space to put a lot of other scientific data. So there's molecules here, there's lab equipment, there's the COVID-19 response. And right now the top level says e-NABLE, but eventually that could be open source assistive tech. And then e-NABLE could be a collection below that, and then there could be many other things.
Yep, exactly. So as long as we think a lot about how we build out these drop downs and the different filtering options we give, you should be able to quickly sort through. It doesn't really matter. I mean, nobody's going to be browsing through the full catalog. They're going to, first step would be to use the filters, and then, they should end up just like you're seeing here. They end up with, maybe half a dozen designs for their consideration.
The other cool thing is there's some software on the back end here. They do have a 3D visualizer, and they have a file converter. So you can upload one file type and download many file types from those designs.
That's very interesting.
It is.
is it possible to preload the drop downs so that they present a simple, appropriately filtered range to the first-time user?
I think any of that customization we could work with their web developers and build in.
Okay.
They're a
That's
little like it's not
default.
super fast, but it's well implemented.
Well, I think that's more important than speed. And I didn't notice any speed issues. I mean, it's pretty responsive.
Oh, I meant the feedback for iterative changes.
Oh,
The changes
okay.
happen, but I
Got
like
it.
Jeremy. Remember, we were trying to work on that hero image at the top. It took a couple weeks, but now
That's right.
it was what we asked for.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have thoughts about the approach we're talking about of maybe using NIH for a full catalog with nice filtering options and using printables for a just the most well vetted and well documented designs?
I will toss in just a couple things because I'm being yelled at to run to
Oh
another.
yeah.
But yeah, this is great. I think this is a good approach. I am working on kind of creating what is that process for testing devices to get them well validated, to get them onto printables. Because one of the things I'm working on is with some prosthetists in Africa working on feet. And I'm getting access to the actual ISO testing standards that they follow to assess these kinds of things, prosthetics, so that I can run them through those kinds of tests so that we can validate some of these things. So getting testing
Very nice.
procedures that are well established and can be repeated by all university groups and all sorts of people all over. That's what I'm working on getting set up. I'd like to think about creating maybe an open source testing standard instead of all these ones that are locked down and ridiculously expensive. I've got a budget and I can pay for these documents to figure out what they're testing and then just create our own and publish it for free for everybody to do. So that's where I'm thinking. And I think
very
that's
cool.
kind of separation between NIH and printables. I saw Thierry had a comment too. So. And then I got
Thierry, you're muted, Thierry.
Eric, since you were there, I was about to ask, in France, the device we make the most is the Phoenix hand, and it's not unprintable. So I'd like to see there. And we have basically we do the kinetic hand, the limited arm, and the Phoenix, and the knick finger. And these are the four devices that we do make today. So if we don't see all those four on printable, then it's not complete. I understand your concerns of quality and requirements of product description and so on. But if we don't have those four there, for us, it's not complete.
So for the Phoenix, I've run it through tests and it doesn't pass tests as well as the other devices. So the rubber bands that you use, the dental bands, they break after a couple months, maybe a couple weeks. So that's not a very good longevity solution. The unlimited arm, the hinges tend to be really tough to thermoform for a lot of people. And those pins, the 3D printed pins will just snap. So we get a lot of breakage at the elbow too. And all the testing we do. I don't see that with the Kwawu arm. And I don't see those kinds of breakages happening. And I don't see that kind of just not good outcomes with the kinetic hand. So that's why I don't have the Phoenix designs up there. I know they're popular. I know there's lots of people doing them. But in testing, I don't find them to be one that I would recommend. So I'm happy to talk about it. Now I'm getting.
Yeah, I know you got to run, Eric. So
Yeah,
we can
I
have some
gotta
more
run.
discussion about that next time. But I think it's a good discussion to have. How do we, what are those standards? How do we establish what can and can't be added to that catalog? Thank you, Eric, and we'll see you next time.
I actually have to run to get to a
Okay.
meeting for
Well,
the
maybe
9 to 5.
We should probably work towards wrapping up here because I have a hard stop anyway at the top of the hour too, and I think we've made good progress today. And I'll come to you in just a second, Ian. I would suggest maybe that we try to stick to the schedule. Hopefully 2 weeks from today, which would be the 1st of March, would be our next meeting. If that works for all of you, we would do it at the same time immediately following the town hall. Does that work for the people that are still here by chance?
Yeah.
Same time,
Yeah.
2 weeks from now? Okay, let's shoot for
Yep.
that. I'll ask Sarah to help me as she did before to kind of coordinate by email and get a new invite out, but let's assume 2 weeks from today, same time, same link and everything, just so we can kind of keep things on a consistent schedule. Ian, you had something you wanted to say.
I just wanted to say maybe a goal for next steps in this is for me to meet with Eric and get that Lumio proposal expanded to be a couple students. And I don't know the exact right number, but I think it would be great if there was like one from my group, one from his group, maybe a couple more to work on that.
That's interesting. Talk to Eric. And by the way, we created an international incident just now because Thierry's standard designs aren't up to Eric's standards. One of the advantages, Eric said, look, I'm going to set this up the right way according, and he didn't have to ask permission, but it does raise an interesting question. I think you and he should talk it through.
And there's nothing absolute here. I'm sure Eric is open to the idea that, this is all somewhat subjective. I think the important thing is that we come up with some guidelines that we can all agree on. What does a device need to have in order to qualify for our most recommended kind of catalog? And if we agree on a set of criteria, and if we can then look at the Phoenix and say, okay, yeah, it does meet those criteria, then we add it in. If we agree on a set of criteria and the Phoenix falls short in some of those, then we don't. That doesn't mean it can't be used. It just might not be in that,
of course,
catalog.
It does, but a third possibility is that we say, let's take a close look at the Phoenix and see if we can keep it as easy and robust as it is, but address those concerns.
Right.
I've never had this thought before, so I will express it because I can never hold on to a new idea, keep it to myself. But you could have metal springs on the underside that would provide the same opening function that the rubber bands do.
Well, they have to be on the top side.
No.
In order to extend the fingers?
Yeah, they could be.
If they're on the underside, they're going to close the fingers.
No, but they're not pulling springs. They're pushing springs like the ones on a ballpoint pen.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway, the point is, Eric's standards, I think, sound like a really good idea. And we could use them to motivate specific projects to fix the Phoenix in such a way that Terry's people continue to make their happy device, but they're no longer in the rubber band replacement business.
Yeah, it's a worthy discussion to be sure. So we'll continue that next time. I think that's probably a good point to pause for today, because I think we made several good kind of forward progress topic areas. So I think it's a good place to wrap. Does anybody have anything that you'd like to cover before we wrap for today?
I have something I need to say.
Yes.
Our benefactor, Arrow Electronics, Ivy Bostrom, had a meeting with me scheduled when I was in Panama, and I just screwed up the meeting. I apologize profusely, and we have another meeting set for 9:45 p.m. Eastern Time when I will be, no, that's not right. That's not right. It's 3:45 Eastern Time. I will be in Portugal. It'll be 9:45 for me, but that's okay. I'm happy to meet with her solo, but Jeremy or Jason might think they should be there.
Is this,
I don't know.
saying today?
No. I'll give you the date, but it's in about a week.
Okay.
I'll definitely be there.
If it's, you'd have to let me know when it is. If it's in a week on Friday, the 23rd, I'm going to
No, it's not. I'll tell you exactly. It is on Wednesday, the 21st.
I could be available then.
3:45. So let's talk for a moment about whether that's a good thing or not. I've had a cordial conversation. I've had one cordial conversation with Ivy, and we got $100,000. I, what she wants to talk about is ways in which Arrow and their employees can work with us, et cetera.
Great.
I don't think we're seeking more money from them at this point.
No, but
So I guess I think Jeremy is probably the right other person. Evan was in on the last conversation, and
I would say we
perhaps-
might want to try to have Morgan in on that too, because I wouldn't be surprised if there's some opportunities for them to help with the
Yes.
projects she's doing.
okay then. So at this point, we're talking about 3 or 4 people. The only question is whether I should meet with her individually and say, hey, how about,
It's
once
your
I
call.
understand what kinds of things they have an appetite for,
Okay,
then I can propose a larger meeting. So I think I've fallen back to the notion that it should be me.
okay. Just
Sure.
let us know then who you want to get involved in the next step.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything that you'd like to talk about or share before we wrap up? Okay, we're going to shoot for 2 weeks out then, same time, same place, and we'll get a link sent out to you. Thank you all.